The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus saw the crowds. He went up the mountain, and after he had sat down, his disciples came to him. He began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. As I prepared for this Mass and reviewed the readings, I saw, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven is theirs." And I saw it twice, once at the responsorial psalm as the response, and again in the gospel. So I said, this is interesting. So I asked myself, who are the poor in spirit? And how does that make them so blessed that the kingdom of heaven is theirs? With that, I took note that in the first reading, the prophet Zephaniah was urging those of us seeking the Lord to be humble and lowly, to have some humility. And in the second reading, Paul was leading us to consider our own calling. To what and to whom are we called? Paul was saying that if we had to boast in the Lord. I thought that would be our calling to the Lord, and the way God shows each of us how to get to heaven. And some humility probably enters into it. Let us consider then how Jesus is calling you and me to live our lives so that our reward is the kingdom of heaven. In recent gospel readings from Matthew, we remember how, having been baptized in the Jordan River and then tempted by the devil, Jesus moved from Nazareth to Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee. It was early in his public ministry when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount in the open to a large crowd. Matthew's gospel reading today comes from the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus preaches the Beatitudes. Imagine, if you will, that you are part of the great crowd that has come from Galilee, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond to see and hear Jesus. Imagine that you are part of the throng of people that Jesus saw as he went up the mountain, a hillside, really, to position himself to preach. You came to hear what Jesus had to say. You are curious and drawn to him. You had heard how he had called his first disciples, some fishermen, just by saying, "Follow me." They had immediately dropped their nets and walked away from their boats, leaving everything behind to be with him. You had heard about how he was preaching in the synagogues with such great authority about the kingdom of heaven, and how Jesus was curing and healing all those with all sorts of diseases. Jesus is said to be from this kingdom of heaven. You had studied and knew well the law and the prophets, the Old Testament. As he sat down to teach, Jesus looked like a new Moses to you. You hung on every word he began as he began to teach. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And as Jesus continued to preach, you realized this was a new teaching, but it complemented and built on the teachings you knew, like the 10 Commandments. And somehow it was Jesus himself that was insisting on a new way of living that promised the kingdom of heaven. This anointed one, this Messiah, was to save us, not through the military victories you had hoped for, but instead through the hope of blessings, not to come now in this world, but in the next, and would be eternal, lasting forever. The change Jesus preached was to begin now if we turned our lives over to him, this King, and follow him like his disciples had done at the seashore. He was firm in insisting, but at the same time, kind and merciful in his manner. The way he seemed to be looking just at you, even though you were one among many in the crowd. As you listened to all the blessings that would lead to this kingdom, he told you you needed to be poor in spirit. It seemed that all the blessings hinged on being poor in spirit in one way or another. You wondered what you needed to do to be poor in spirit. You remembered the words of Zephaniah that said, in essence, it was not so much what you needed to do, but how you had to be, who you were, how you lived. You are to be poor from within, a seeking of justice and humility, to be a people humble and lowly. You observed the law, did no wrong, spoke no lies. And you did not point to the good things that you did and then tell everyone how humble you were, thereby showing a pride and arrogance that many in the temple, Pharisees and Sadducees had. You just did them because that is who you were, just humble. However, with the words of Jesus you are hearing now, it seemed he was calling on his disciples to a way of life where they are to be peacemakers, clean of heart, to show mercy, where those who hunger and thirst for righteousness in this world will be blessed. He was now calling us to be what he called children of God, where you may be insulted and persecuted because of him. Jesus was calling us to be something more as he preached the Sermon on the Mount. Now, to everyone here right now, I now turn to you. Are we not, in effect, part of the crowd to whom Jesus was preaching his sermon? Is not Jesus speaking to us today as well? How do the words of Jesus impact you and me today? What kind of lives are we called to live in the here and now so that we will be blessed in the kingdom of heaven? In the second reading, Paul challenges us to consider our own calling. We are called to empty our inmost being so that our soul can be filled with the grace of God. We are called to a poverty of spirit to realize that we are utterly dependent on God for everything. A state of being, a humility, where every breath we have comes from God. We are called to a detachment from things of the world, a spirit of poverty, to be poor in spirit, where it does not matter how much money or power or lack thereof we may have, just how we use them. Called to a spirit of poverty where God's ways are considered foolish in the eyes of the world, and everything depends on him and not us. If we have to boast, boast in the Lord. Jesus looks to each of us and says, "Follow me." We will indeed rejoice and be glad. Our reward will be great in heaven.